And so like, this is one of the big things about the Italian system that I like, is that one of our exercises are called the molinelli, the windmills. And they're a way to build up muscle, but they're also practical. So for example, I can probably show you one in here. From this guard, which is our preferred on guard, it's called second, I would bend it at the elbow. And as I do this, I'm now going through the guard of first. And then I come around and I strike, right? And then I would go to another line. Let's say I want to go over here. Well, now I'm parrying 6, and then I cut to the cheek. And over here, I'm parrying 5, and I cut. So each one of those exercises goes through both the offense and defense. Yeah. And then there's all kinds of stuff I can do in between. Yeah. I'm not hitting very hard, but I'm hitting with a specific technique. And they've done some science on this. I think it was, again, I think it was Masiello wrote up a whole thing on the physics behind this. And so from the rotation here and what that's going to do, and then at the last minute, you kind of snap that in. If you're using those mechanics and your intent is to do harm, you can do a lot of damage. And I actually did a video some time ago, I should find it, where I took this sword, which is blunt, right? And I hit a cantaloupe just normally, and it severed the cantaloupe. It's blunt. So if I were really angry and, you know, in a fight or something, or afraid for my life, that's going to have a little bit more energy behind it too. And so when people say that's not a martial blow, what they mean here is you didn't hit hard enough.
Yeah.
And hitting hard is sometimes necessary, but there's this idea that every blow must take off a limb. And that's not true. I mean, we have ample sources that talk about somebody getting cut in the arm and not being able to continue. You know, and if that's a fight ender right there. They don't have, like, Talhoffer's another good example. There's several images there where he's chopping somebody's hand off. Chop off the hand, they can't hold the weapon, you know. So that's my kick against it. I think it's a perfectly good word. I just think it's misused within, especially popular heme. I think it's just misused.
Yeah.
Good fencers don't hit hard. They hit effectively.
That's right. Jim, could we just go ahead and, okay, what about fighting in armor? Do you also teach that, or do you do that?
I don't teach it, but I have done it and I love it. It's super fun. And actually, as I get older, I think I would like to do that more, because it's almost like having a body harness.
Yeah, it is.
Like a primitive walker. I've only done a little bit of harness, but it's so much fun. And it's very educational. You know, the first time I did this was at a demonstration here, and it was summertime. It was super hot. And I don't do well in hot weather, but I've got, you know, gambeson, mail, plate. I have this very heavy cavalry helmet on that I can hardly breathe in. And it keeps shifting on my head. So I'm trying to see my opponent, and there's just this little line. So I'm constantly trying to see him. The next thing I know, he's behind me and he's folded me around, and I'm in this arm bar. And of course, the weight of that helmet just starts pulling you closer to the ground. So then there's the resistance. Like, it was very educational for me about the fitness it takes to do this, and how you breathe. You know, all of that is just fascinating. I look forward to doing more of it, to be honest. It's super fun.
It takes lots of fitness to fight in it.
It does. It does.
Jim, what about, could you tell us, do you do any archery or this type of things in your school?
No, we don't. Although whenever I get a chance, I will dabble in archery. There's I don't know what it is about Oregon. I think there's a large hunting contingent that does bow hunting here. So there are places one can go and do this. And I know several people that work on historic archery. One of Mike's old students does, for example. And I'm not a very good archer. I'm a much better shot with a rifle than I am with a bow. But I like the challenge of it, you know. Yeah, I haven't done a lot with archery at all, or with throwing much of anything. You know, once upon a time, a long time ago, I threw knives and things like that. But I haven't done much with it here. It's been much more mano a mano.
Okay. I'm asking you this because you also told me, which it's for me extremely interesting. And so I'm going to ask you, you also talked, I think I heard, did I hear you correctly that you also did research or studied early American history? Did I understand you correctly? Okay,
A little
because
bit.
I'm very fascinated by American history. That's the reason, you know. And I want to ask you this. Haven't you been interested in looking into materials of how they fought in your country back then, be it
Oh
a
yeah.
Bowie knife, be it, I don't know, different types of things like that?
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the great things about some of the saber and small sword is that those were used here. But I'll be honest, the thing that I think I would most like to see, and I don't know if we can do it, would be like a lot of the Native American arts.
Yeah.
I mean, these were formidable fighters. And some of the accounts that we have, some of the extant weapons, through some very unfortunate history over the last 300 years. So much of that, so much of their culture has been erased. And I think very effectively with that is most of the fighting arts. Now, I don't know. I know that there are people who are trying to do work with tomahawk and Bowie knife. And I don't know what they're drawing, to be honest. I don't know what that's coming from. I've asked about sources and I haven't found any. I mean, there are accounts like about Jim Bowie fighting with his knife and, but as a system, I haven't seen a whole lot for that. And so I would love to know how they did that. And just for like one example, when my mother was a teenager in the East Coast up in the mountains, they had she lived in a very remote area and they used to have a county fair. And one of the events was a black powder musket event. And part of that was being able to reload on the run. So they'd shoot a target, then they have to be able to run and reload this 50 caliber musket. And this was, 1940s, 1950s, and there were still people who could do it. That's fascinating to me. This is a rifle and they're doing it on the run. I love stuff like that. So I, and especially since my family's been here, well, part of my family's been here long enough that like my dad grew up with Native Americans and a lot of Mexican because he was a rancher. And so he worked alongside.
Where are you located? Excuse me, just for our viewers, I forgot to ask you, where are you located in the United States?
Right outside of Portland, Oregon now.
Oregon, okay.
But my father was born in Medford and Klamath. Well, he was down in Medford and Klamath. And so they were ranching in Northern California, Southern and Eastern Oregon. In fact, I'm the first one in the family not to do it. So, I have some odd knowledge about horses that I shouldn't have since I don't ride them very often. But that, he actually finished college by selling cattle. He sold his herd of Angus to go to finish school. So because of that lifestyle, though, he grew up with a lot of Modoc and other Native peoples. And I think was very lucky. His father had friends who were Native American, which at that day and age was very strange, especially in Oregon. Oregon has if you were to do much digging, it has a very unfortunate past with racism. And so I feel very fortunate.
Could you expand on it?
Sure. In some ways, the state of Oregon, there were people organizing it as a state that wanted to exclude African Americans in particular. And there were laws in place to make that happen. But there's also a very long history of violence against Native Americans. And it's a part of, especially in the US, it's a story that a lot of people don't like to dwell on. We don't have much to be proud of when it comes to that. And people like to feel proud, but it's important. And it has ongoing consequences today, So in that sense, knowing that about the state and knowing how long my family's been here, I feel very fortunate because my parents didn't raise us that way. And I was an Army brat, so we moved all over and I had friends who spoke every language and every religion. And that was very lucky for me. It made my world a lot larger.
Absolutely. Very interesting. Have you ever tried, I'm sure you have possibly, because I'm really fascinated, to shoot like flintlocks, percussion cap, black powder guns?
I cannot wait to do this. And actually, I'm so glad you brought this up, Dr. Corsani. One of the guys in my broadsword group, his wife has been coming. She grew up shooting black powder with her dad. And she still has several, like a Sharps rifle and some of the percussion caps. And she said when COVID makes it okay that we would go shoot. So I can't wait. I'll have to report on it for you. Yeah, I've always wanted to shoot those, and never had the chance. So hopefully this summer.
Very fascinating. Very fascinating. Very, and black powder guns and rifles and muskets are really fascinating. Really.
Yeah, I'll be honest. If I had, Americans like their firearms. If I had my choice, everybody would have one musket. And that's it.
Yes, right.
That don't happen.
Could you go ahead and talk about the values and things if you liked to talk about them, the value system, because you also come from traditional Asian martial arts, and I need to mention something. And as you possibly know, I also come from traditional Asian arts, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes, and yes, and the first thing I told Mike and also told Greg and many things, which I came and saw that. Also told Bob that I don't want to complain, but when I came, okay, I understand the movement. The movement was like, may I just make a comparison? The movement was, I come from a very, as you know, one of the styles I have still been practicing and I'm preparing for my black belt third dan is karate kyokushin, full contact. And this kyokushin, which I have a second dan, I'm going for the third dan, is a very tough game. And I also do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Don't forget Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Let's stick to wrestling and let's stick to kyokushin. It's very, very, very traditional. Tough, but traditional. Meaning, when, for example, the founder was alive, you were not allowed as a black belt to show happiness when you won. You had only to do os, that's it. Even guys who won world championship had to do os, that's it. Because Oyama said, celebrating and showing happiness means that you conquered other black belts and you hurt them. It's a full contact art, and you shouldn't be celebrating it. And, I came from that. And then another thing which I started also, as you did at the age of 5 and 6 with wrestling. As you know, koshti, as we say in Persian, is a sacred, wrestling is a sacred art in Iran, still is. Wrestling for us, here they call it Olympic wrestling. For us, any type of wrestling has a huge, deep tradition. For example, wrestlers always look down, wrestlers should help people. When I came here, and I understand, let's put it this way, when the whole idea of kickboxing, I'm not talking about Muay Thai, because Muay Thai is very traditional. I'm talking about American kickboxing. Okay, back then, late Joe Louis, whom I really respected, please, guys, don't misunderstand me. And the whole idea started, people wanted to break away from all these Asian traditions, right? So they started with this kickboxing. And I competed a lot of years also in kickboxing. But back then, what I disliked about kickboxing was exactly, again, this lack of respect, right? Which coming from Kyokushin, I absolutely dislike. People who trained, because I studied in University of Gießen in Germany and also Wisconsin in the United States. But in both, I also not only did wrestling, I also competed in kickboxing next to, this and Kyokushin. But I disliked it. When I came to HEMA circles, I expected, this is a traditional historical arts. What I saw was even worse than American kickboxing. And I have never seen such a behavior, even among American kickboxers. And I think late Mr. Lewis, now he's gone, he's that tremendous fighter, or Mr. Wallace, Bill Wallace will also understand. I lacked in kickboxing the respect of Kyokushin and wrestling in Iran. But when I came to HEMA, I saw a mentality. I cannot explain this mentality to you. I talked to many HEMA instructors, European, and now you are one of them as experienced people. And I always ask myself, where does this lack of respect come from? And then I see, this is something, which I also said, you can't fight. Let's talk about unarmored, because with weapons looks different. But when you fight, let's say a tough game like Kyokushin, MMA, and all these things. One of the things which I also wish MMA would change, again, to initiate respect right? And you don't need, in Kyokushin, you knock people out, right?
Yeah.
You knock them out, but you cannot disrespect. If you're disrespected, you're going to be immediately disqualified. So
Right.
in wrestling, the same. It's a tough game, but you're going to be immediately disqualified. And I mean, these are sports or combat sports, I know. And then when I come in HEMA and see this mentality, I'm always lost.
I have the same reaction. That's one thing I think that I started an invitational sabre event in 2019. And I've had a lot of help with it from local friends. And one of the goals I had was to create a new sort of tournament. So it's invite only, which means that helps me keep out some of the trouble elements. But partly it was also to kind of see, will this work? Because you have to salute, you have to shake hands, you have to get in that ring or strip, and you have to think, okay, this is a person I'm about to fight with. And there are honorable ways to do that. There are respectful ways to do that. And I think like with the hard arts where you could have a knockout, there's this recognition of, as good a fighter as you are, you may have a bad day, or you may just meet your match. And so respect is a great way to start. And I don't have much to do with competition HEMA for this very reason. It's also one of the things that drove me away from Olympic fencing. When saber fencers were ripping off their masks and yelling, my coach, the masters I worked with would have kicked me out themselves. There's no way that was okay. You always show respect. And I think it's, at least in the US, people feel very entitled to things, but they don't want to be reciprocal. And so there's this very competitive mindset of I'm out there to win versus, the place that I'm coming from is every competition is a chance to test the skills I've been practicing and learn through either winning or defeat what I need to work on. It's really about beating me, becoming better, improving myself. And what's interesting to me too, this idea feels very, very, very Asian. And I've learned it every martial art, like Kendo, we spent time meditating, we would bow. And, you don't break those formalities, they're very important. There's a smallsword text from England. And in it, one man is describing the benefits that you get from sword training. And one of the lines there, and it's funny that nobody else ever talks about this, but he says, it imparts strength and grace and agility. And he says, in learning to conquer yourself through others. So the same idea has been present in European fencing, that this could be a methodology for self-improvement. And yet we haven't focused on it. And here it's very combative. It's me against you versus us working together to learn and improve ourselves. And so for me, any tournament that I'm going to be involved in, I want it more along those lines. And the last time we had it was a year before COVID hit. And I think it went very well. It was small, but it was the kind of competition where afterwards people started fencing for fun because they just wanted to do more. And to me, that's where we should be, because you get to fence with people who are better than you are. I fenced this one guy, his name's Don Conradui, who teaches up in Vancouver. That's one of the best fights I've had in a long time. He was tough. I learned a lot in that match, and that's what I'm here to do. Plus, I think, and you were probably taught this as well, but I know like in Taekwondo, I was always said, don't shy away from better fighters. Yeah. Get in the ring with them. And yeah, you may lose, you likely will, but what you will learn is valuable. And it's true. I broke a nose. I had my ribs broken at one point. I still learned a lot. And that opponent is also your teacher, your partners in a way. And so that's my approach to HEMA. I bring that same ethos to what I'm teaching, even though it seems a little out there, because I teach a lot of kids, for example, and then they need to learn these things. Society only works if we're respectful of one another.
Yeah.
And that stop doing that, things get really ugly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it makes me sad too. I don't like it. It's
absolutely. This is something which we, thank you for mentioning this as well and talking about that. That's something which it's really, really need to be initiated, and then, I remember it was in Germany, and some guys, I discussed them and I said, oh, come on, this is this Asian thing and respect. And I said, you know what? I said, yeah, it's Asian, but from each culture one can learn, and you guys maybe can learn from Asian, right?
well, and I have
If it's Asian, and I'm sure European knights had values, I told them. But let's say they didn't. Let's say in a worst case scenario, they didn't, right? But if there is something good to be learned from another culture, then we can learn.
Right. Well, and it's true. I was thinking there was a television show I used to watch years and years ago. And they have an American version now, but I watched the Japanese version. And they would do these crazy obstacle courses. And at the end, if they won, they'd say like, wow, you did really well there. It's like, well, I just did my best. I had very good coaches, very humble. And then they had like one or two Americans who got up there and I'd say, yeah, I beat it. Woo. It just looked so ugly to me. I was like, there's no humility there. It's like, okay, you're proud of yourself, but how's that read? Especially
I don't understand. Okay.
people around you, and you're for me, and this will sound again, I think to a lot of human people, very Asian, but it's human. I don't care where it comes from. Your opponent,
it's human.
Yeah, your opponent is you can't go anywhere without them. You need your opponents. You could practice all this all by yourself, but you'll never test it.
Never.
So opponent is vital. It's important. You have to have respect for that, because there's nothing, and that should carry over into their lives as well. I told my son, for example, when he started martial arts, he's like, what if I never get in a fight? And I said, well, great. That's the best martial arts there is. Avoiding trouble.
Exactly.
That's the goal. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I have a soapbox. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you very much. Jim, could you also tell us more about your school? How is your school organized? Just share some information. I'm going to share the link to the school of Jim here in the description, but could you just tell us a bit about your school, how it works, if people want to come? Okay, now we are in COVID time, but soon it's going to be over, right?
Before COVID, we had, I was subletting out of a dance school, which was great because it rains here quite a bit. Right now, we're fencing outside, fighting outside, masks, everything. But we meet locally, and usually if we can find cover, we take it. And I don't know what's going to happen as things change here. Hopefully, as more people get the vaccine and as the pandemic gets a little bit less horrible, we'll be able to go back to a building. So I've got contact information on the website. They can contact me or email me, and I can tell them kind of what we're doing. Right now, most people I'm teaching one-on-one, and then I've got this one group that is sort of, Mike and I are kind of working together with a couple different groups, and it's mostly his Fiore people that want to do broadsword. And so I'm working with them. There are some restrictions for the amount of people that can gather, but that's going to change, and we'll be able to add more. So my classes are very formal. We salute in, we salute out. We do a lot of drill, and bouting we do initially really as just teaching bouts to sort of hone technique. As they advance, then there's more free bouting. And that's another thing that tends to not be for everybody. Some people just want to get in there and start swinging, and I think they should know what they're doing first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right. That's true. Okay, at the end of our discussion, it was lovely talk. Really, I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Lovely to meet actually in person.
Thank you very much for being in on our TV and accepting our invitation. Thank you very much, and
very awesome.
See you soon. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. Thank you.